This is Every Folk Song, a podcast where I, Matt Ockham, dig as deep into old English folk songs as I possibly can, following the order of the Roud Folk Song Index. And then I take all that hard work and I just straight up give it to you guys for free, aka a podcast. Today I'm looking at Roud 14, The Daemon Lover. Stick with us. Roud 14, Child 243, The Daemon Lover, or The House Carpenter, or James Harris. It's a song with a fairly simple story. A woman's long-lost lover returns from out of the blue, begs her to come away with him. But she refuses. He's been gone for years, so long that she thought he'd never return, so she moved on, got married, had kids. He becomes indignant and yells at her, "Do you know I could have married a princess? But I didn't. I came back to you." When that doesn't work, he begs, "I have gold and ships and servants, and I can take you away to an amazing foreign land." And with that, for some reason, she agrees. And she regrets it soon after. Whether it's because he's exaggerated his wealth, or because she misses her children, or because he's not quite the man he used to be. In one way or another, she begins to weep. It's here he tells her that he's not taking her away to any kind of paradise. It's hell to which they're bound. The ship sinks, or he sinks it, and it takes the two of them with it beneath the sea. A simple tale, with some variations as we'll discuss, but that's the general idea. It's kind of sad and kind of spooky and, well, unsettling is a good word for it. Because there's so much more here than appears on the surface. And as it turns out, the song itself is the least complicated thing about the song.
Well met, my own true love. I've just returned from sea. I could have married a king's daughter there, but for the love of thee.
If you could love me, king's daughter dear, I know you are to blame. Let me forsake my house carpenter, and we can slip away.
She bid farewell to her own young son, kissed him cheek to cheek.
That was The Daemon Lover by Pauline Scanlon from her 2006 album, Hush. So the first thing I want to do here is I want to take a look at the moral of the story. In the story, as you just heard it, did you extract a moral? Could you suss out who the bad guy is? How about who the good guy is? By its structure of action and consequence, I think it's clear that it's a morality play of some sort, but what the hell are we supposed to take from it besides a random, sad, cruel occurrence? The answers may seem obvious to you, but I think are incredibly complicated. And to illustrate this, I asked a few people these questions.
I think it's kind of your classic grass is greener on the other side. You always want something better than what you currently have.
I think the moral is to not be led into temptation because it could be the devil.
The song is about cheating and why that's bad. You can see the wife was cheating on her husband. She gets sent to hell from it.
My first impression was of a love song, but I got the feeling that that was not, in fact, the case.
I like how ambiguous it is. Is this actually her ex coming back to lure her to a watery grave and also hell eternal? Or is this the devil trying to tempt her away from the relationship she does have? And is he actually a devil?
Is this not the man that she was previously in a relationship with?
I mean, it looks the same, but he's got demon hooves, and you'd think maybe she'd have noticed that.
He's promising something super normal. Like he says, you know, I'm a ship's captain, I have these ships, I have this crew, and then she gets on board the ship and she's like, where is everybody? She gets on board anyway. And she's aware that he's lying to her, like almost from the get-go. It's like, don't worry about it. We're going to Italy. And, like, she's willingly ignoring the fact that he's being dishonest this whole time.
It doesn't seem to be like the most ambiguous of songs. She thinks her fiancé from a few years ago is back, but oh no, it's the devil. But maybe someone can put a twist on it and give it a new moral suited for the modern era. It's a bit old-fashioned.
My takeaway is that it's okay to follow your instincts. So this is a character that had fallen in love once before, and even if it was with an unsavory sort of personality, it was enough of a real connection that she felt it was important to leave the vows that she had with another man and a family. And this time frame, I'm sure that would have been frowned upon deeply. She's probably feeling guilt, but in the end, these two people sail off. And yes, the ship does sink, but in the end of all ships sink eventually.
The moral I drew from this was mostly leave things from the past in the past. And don't leave something that you currently have and underappreciate for something that you used to have and you're trying to rekindle.
It's easy to be lured away by promises and by adventures. So, you know, when he turns into the devil, I guess it's not that surprising, but it kind of bums me out a little bit. You know, we always say things like, don't want things you don't have or be happy with what you have. And it's not that I disagree, but sometimes adventures are exciting. You know, if you shoot for something, you can get something amazing. So
If you're married and then your lover has been presumably dead at sea, comes back, then stay faithful to your husband. That's the moral. It was pretty better for her to just leave her husband and her children without saying a word, but I don't think that's worth going to hell for.
You should stay true to your word, or else. There was some sort of oath, you know, maybe they were married, you know, they mentioned vows. After getting on board, she sees his cloven foot, which to me identified him as the sort of demon. So this brings in the religious undertones, which led me to believe why you shouldn't lie, you should stay true to your word. You know, adultery is a major sin.
Does there have to be a moral?
So the moral of the story for you is, like, sometimes really weird, scary things happen?
I mean, first of all, I'm not convinced that there is, in fact, a moral at all.
Mm-hmm.
But second of all, does she, in fact, go to the bottom of the ocean, or is that a metaphor for something else?
Yeah, maybe it is all metaphorical.
Theoretically, it could also mean that their relationship was, in fact, a sinking boat, in the sense that after coming back from wherever he was, which could also be a metaphor for something. I lost my train of thought for a second.
I don't think the moral is too hard to miss there. It's warning against greed, lustfulness, and running away from what you have to pursue something better. So be content with what you have, accept that there could be missed opportunities that you can't go back to.
When she sees the Black Hill, he says, oh, this is hell, that's where you and I must go. Which led me to believe, oh, she did something bad to him, you know, broke this vow, so he cast her down, sunk her in the ship beneath the sea because of this.
If I had to put it in like a modern context, I'd say communicate. It is a painful, horrible situation for everyone involved, but communicate and be open about your feelings.
Never let people who found you disposable back into your life. Because if they found you disposable once, they'll just find you disposable again. There's a reason they left.
I don't know. Maybe what I'm trying to say is I'm a little bored of this trope, and, you know, I wish it was a little more aspirational.
So I think the artist was trying to portray that cheating is wrong and you shouldn't do it.
Here she is walking away from one relationship to chase down this potentially toxic ex. And so the boat that is sinking is all of the promises that he made her that things are going to be better and she should sail away with him. Yeah, moral of the story, don't get mixed up with your exes. Actually, all my ex-girlfriends are great people. Actually, not.
You know, no matter what this guy's promising you, obviously, you know, you can't forsake your marriage vows. but more so, like, you can tell that you're heading down the road to hell when you start believing things that are obviously not true. Like, this guy says that he loves you and he's promising you all of these amazing things, but you know that that's too good to be true. So if you know what to look for, you can avoid the situation that this woman finds herself in. If you allow yourself to believe what this guy's telling you, then you deserve to go to hell because you've ignored the warning signs.
I think that there's two villains, and the one is the mariner tempting the woman away from her family. He's the personification of the devil, or he's become a devil. And wife who's run away from her family, not a good move. She seems particularly tempted by the ships and the music, at least that's what you might read from it. She's damned herself, and they're damned together.
I don't think there's really a hero in this story. I think it's more of just a cautionary tale about a woman who has an okay life, but I guess sees the opportunity for a more extravagant life. The true villain would be the devil that leads her into this more extravagant life, only to drown her and send her to hell.
I think that maybe it's a warning that going in with another relationship when you're already married with someone is like selling your soul to the devil and going to hell.
Yeah, because it gave him control over her in order to send her to hell. Stay at home, stay with your husband, or your ship will sink to the bottom.
Yeah, it's a very moralistic, these folk tales. So that's it. End of message.
Cat is eating all of your Legos.
I know, it's really pissing me off.
We have a very cute cat, and it is eating the Legos.
Yes.
There's a lot to unpack there. And I'm going to be including a longer version of that breakdown of people's different interpretations of the moral of the song on the website, so go check that out. But I think it's prudent that we jump back and look at the Daemon Lover from a historical context. But first, let's listen to one of my favorites, the Handsome Family, singing their version of The House Carpenter. The song was first published by Lawrence Price in 1657 on a broadside titled A Warning for Married Women by the Example of Mrs. Jane Reynolds, a West Country woman born near unto Plymouth, who, having plighted her troth to a seaman, was afterwards married to a carpenter, and at last carried away by a spirit. The manner how shall be presently recited. In contrast, the most popular song at the time of this recording is called The Box. Anyway, Warning to Married Women. It tells the story of a lovely young woman named Jane Reynolds, who was courted by many men but pledged her love to one young man named James Harris. He took off to sea on some business, and she waited for him. But news came back that he had died. So she mourned for a few years, then moved on, and was married to a local ship's carpenter of renown, with whom she had 3 children. But then one night, the ghost of James Harris appears in her window when her husband's off on a business trip. She at first refuses to leave with him, saying she's married. And he says, look, I could have married a princess who was super rich, and I didn't. So she's like, okay, but how can you even provide for me if I ran off with you? And he says, I've got 7 ships full of stuff and guys, and they're yours. So she goes, and she's never heard from again. Really, she exits the song there. The husband comes home, finds her missing, and goes bonkers. Tears his hair, runs screaming through the streets, and then he hangs himself. The last lines are about how the 3 children are left all alone. But it ends on a debatably hopeful note, as it explains that God will provide for them. That's a lot different in details than the ballad that you heard earlier, huh? So jumping forward, the song takes on its modern form under the name The Daemon Lover in Scotland. It travels through England and Ireland in this form, and the story focuses more on the fate of the woman than her family, whom she left behind. And it takes another supernatural turn. The story starts the exact same way. The presumed dead lover returns. He's not described as a ghost this time. In fact, he's not described at all. But he says all the same things. She kisses her children goodbye and she leaves with him. However, this time, as they arrive at the ships, they're not as glamorous and numerous as she's been told. And there's either barely a crew or no crew at all.
Where have you been, my dearest dear, these 7 long years or more? I've come to see me for the vows that you promised to me before. Oh, hold your tongue, oh, your former vows, for they will breed sad strife. I hold your tongue, oh, your former vows, for I am become a wife.
Oh, I could have married a king's daughter fair, and she would have married me. I'd never have crossed to Fair Island shore, if 'twere not for the love of thee. If you could have married a king's daughter fair, you've only yourself to blame. For me, I am married to a house carpenter, and I think he's a nice young man. If you will forsake your house carpenter and sail away with me, I'll show you where the white lilies grow on the banks of Italy.
He still talks her onto the boat and they leave. A few weeks in, she learns that this isn't the man she thought he was. For she notices he doesn't have feet, but cloven hooves. She begins to weep that she misses her children and regrets leaving. She goes on to ask about some white hills she sees in the distance. That's heaven, the man says. We're not going there. What about those black hills, she asks. Oh, that's hell. That's where we're going.
She set her foot upon the ship, no crew could she behold, but the sails were made of taffeta and the masts of beaten gold. They had not sailed a league but barely 3, when Dismal grew his countenance, drumly grew his ear. The masts that were like beaten gold bent not on the heaving seas, and the sails made of taffeta filled not on the eastern breeze. They had not sailed a league
what na hills are those, she said, the sun shines sweetly on. Those are the hills of heaven, my love, where you shall never go. And what na mountain is that, she cried, all dreary with frost and snow? That is the mountain of hell, my love, where you and I shall go. But hold your tongue of weeping, my love, let all your follies be. I'll show you where the white lilies grow, on the banks at the bottom of the sea.
And suddenly, a twist! He grows as big as the boat and he smashes it with his hands and feet and they sink to the bottom of the sea.
And I should turn her roundabout, the taller he seemed to be. Until the tops of that gallant ship, they taller well than he. And the clouds grew dark, the wind grew loud, and the levin till tarry. And waves and wailed, the snow ice bright, in the bottom of the sea. He struck the topmast with his hand, the foremast with his knee. And he braked that gallant ship in twain, and he sank her in the sea.
The song then comes to America as the Irish settle in Appalachia. Its name changes again to The House Carpenter, and the supernatural elements sort of fade away, but the focus stays on the woman.
Well met, my own true lover. Well met, cried he. Well, I just returned from the salt sea, and it's all for the love of thee.
She tells her lover, who reappears in her life, that she's married to a house carpenter now, and he gives her the same speech. Then again, she agrees to go.
Well, if you could have married a king's daughter there, I'm sure you're the one to blame. For I am married to a house carpenter, and I'm sure he's a fine young man. Forsake your house carpenter, and come away with me. I'll take you to where the green grass grows on the shores of sunny Italy. So up she picked her babies three, and give them kisses 1, 2, 3, saying take good care of your daddy while I'm gone, and keep him good company.
A few weeks in, she begins weeping, and then he asks her if it's for the house carpenter. And she says no. She's weeping because she misses her children.
Now they have not been on the ship 2 weeks. I swear it was not sweet when his true love began to weep and moan, and she wept most bitterly. Well, now you're weeping for my silver and gold. Oh, now you're weeping for my store. Oh, now you're weeping for that house carpenter that you never shall see no more. A curse on the sailor, she cried. A curse, she swore. You robbed me of my sweet little babe, that I never shall see no more.
They talk about the hills of heaven and hell, like in the last version. And finally, this time in a deep twist of misfortune, the ship springs a leak and sinks beneath the sea.
What hills are those, my dear? What hills so fair and high? Those are the hills of heaven, my dear. but not for you or I. What hills are those, my love? What hills so dark and low? Those are the hills of hell, oh my dear, where you and I must go. They had not been sailing but about 3 days. I'm sure that it was not far when the ship sprang a leak in the bottom of the deck, and she sank for to rise no more.
So now that you're familiar with the way the song has evolved, I think it's time to jump back and talk about this moral in more detail and try to sort this thing out. Number one, this is not the first time on the show we've heard a story about the fear that a man's wife might run off with another. In Raggle Taggle Gypsy, a man was so upset that his woman ran off with someone else that he tracked her down and killed them both. First, this speaks to the anxiety of love. It's why we invented marriage. We're also afraid of losing connection and the good things in our life that will dread our partner finding more happiness elsewhere, even more than we'll work to give our partner that happiness they seek right here in our own relationship. And in less enlightened times, women weren't viewed as something that once married you necessarily have to care for the happiness of. They were viewed as possessions that you could lose if you were careless with them. And that's the second thing it speaks to, the idea that when women run off, it's a mysterious thing that's someone else's fault. It's some trickery or magic or villainy. It's not just an exercise of will or an individual choice for their own happiness. And while that seems like a relic of a bygone time, it's also present today. The narrative when someone gets dumped is often that something was done to the person who was left. And this seems gender agnostic for what it's worth. And maybe we do it because it's hard to accept fault when something so hurtful is happening, but also maybe it's some leftover cultural remnant. A feeling of, how dare your property leave you? It must have gone crazy. So the song is maybe some expression of anxiety about men's wives leaving them, and as it moves forward in time, of course, in the Daemon Lover and House Carpenter forms, the song becomes about punishing the woman for leaving. Number two, this is not the first time we've heard a tale about the dangers of women's youthful indiscretions. Remember the song about the time in the rue?
A false young man came a-courting to me, and he stole all my time away.
One of the lessons of the earliest versions of the Daemon Lover seems to be that the woman was foolish to promise herself to a man when she was so young. That promise came back to haunt her and caused her to leave her family behind. Perhaps this is reading too much into it, but it's a common theme in these ballads that women should feel ashamed of everything romantic in their youth. And the idea that it's hard to escape the ghosts of your past, whether they should be ghosts or not, is one of the base ideas of the story. Number three, as I mentioned before, the Daemon Lover versions of these tales has the woman being punished for her flight. She ran off, not even checking herself or thinking it through, and for her sin she was drowned at sea and sent to hell. She's even tauntingly shown heaven before this happens and told, "You'll never go there, idiot." This is different from the earlier versions of the ballad, where she flies off and is never heard from again. It seems that people who were experiencing that anxiety I expressed before felt that this wasn't a satisfying conclusion. And as that anxiety turned to anger over the centuries, singers and writers had decided to make her fate both certain and harsh. We've seen this before with the difference between The Baffled Knight and Jock Sheep, a ballad about a woman outsmarting a, pardon the profane modern parlance, fuckboy. It became Jock Sheep and turned into anger about the man's fate, presumably by angry, again, pardon, fuckboys who have been shot down before. And it turned into a story about tricking and mocking and raping the woman for revenge. Unfortunately, a quick look at incel message boards and we'll see that this isn't a notion that we've entirely outgrown as a culture. Number 4, the story has been a source of inspiration to many writers over the years, especially in the modern era, and those stories show a different sort of anxiety. I'm gonna get into this pretty deeply soon, but I'll touch on some of it now. Elizabeth Bowen wrote a story in 1945 about a woman being stalked and eventually abducted by a former pre-war lover, now a ghost, over a promise she made to be with him that she couldn't keep due to his death in World War II. This story was called The Daemon Lover. Shirley Jackson wrote in 1949 about a woman obsessed with a man who rushed her into an engagement and disappeared into thin air, driving her into a place of psychological torture and leaving a question of whether this man ever existed or not. The man's name was James Harris, and the story was called The Daemon Lover. The themes that both of these tales, tellingly written by women, I think, share are fear and loneliness, a sort of dangerous loneliness about being a woman in the world, being haunted by your past and your dreams of the future. A fear about what a romantic commitment means to a woman and the depth to which it affects their life. About the ways one cruel, vicious, or disturbed man can throw your life entirely off track to the point of ending it entirely. About the loneliness of no one being willing to listen or take you seriously. Again, more on this in a bit. So, obviously, this is a morally complex ballad. Again, I'm sure it was intended as a straight-up morality tale, but perhaps because of the wisdom of age, it becomes murky. Who is the evil one here? Is the woman evil for making a promise to the sailor and not keeping it? Is she evil for abandoning the House Carpenter? Is the sailor evil for seducing her and murdering her? What this does is speak to the damned if you do, damned if you don't nature of women in romance in society. If you sleep around, you're a slut. If you don't, you're a prude. If you stay with somebody who mistreats you, you're an idiot. If you leave them, you're a harpy. If you don't stand up for yourself, you're a waif. If you do, you're a shrew. This tale represents that wholly. If she stayed, she'd be forswearing the oath to her former lover. If she leaves, she's forswearing the oath to her husband and responsibility to her children. And this is all completely atheistic about what she might want. If we listen to people's interpretations of the morals, there are a lot of ideas that come up again and again. Don't be unfaithful. The grass is always greener. Don't be greedy. Appreciate what you have. If these are the morals, then the woman is the evil one in the story. But I wonder, who is this demon lover? Why is he here, tempting her in the first place? What would he have done if she said no? Why do we have expectations of how she should behave when put up against this monstrous morality test? Is he an agent sent from God to test the strength of her marital bond, or is he a demon from hell sent to tear her down and bring her to hell with him? Let's listen to a song, and while you do, I want to plant an idea. It's a famous paraphrase of a Margaret Atwood quote. It goes, "Men are afraid that women will laugh at them. Women are afraid that men will kill them."
Well met, my own true love, well met, my baby. I have just arrived from the South Sea, and it's all for the love of thee. Now I could have married a great king's daughter, and I have myself to blame. And it's tons of gold I have refused, and it's all for the love of you, my love, all for the love of you. Well, if you could have married a great king's daughter, you have yourself to blame. Well, I have married my house carpenter, and I think he's a nice young man. Well, if you do leave your house carpenter and go along with me, I'll take you to where the grass grows green on the banks of the sweet Violet, my love, the banks of the sweet Violet.
That was The Banks of the Sweet Violet by Dervish. There's a book written by a woman named Toni Reed. The book is called Demon Lovers and Their Victims in British Fiction. I tried desperately to find Miss Reed and bring her on the show, but after contacting her publisher, her university, and old colleague of hers, I hit nothing but dead ends. It's a shame, though, because this book is an incredible analysis of an archetype we don't discuss, but we see in fiction over and over. She called this archetype the Daemon Lover. Just a note here, I'm going to be paraphrasing and interpreting a lot of this book in the next section of the podcast. If you're curious for more of this, check this book out. And also bracket this whole discussion under the citation, Demon Lovers and Their Victims in British Fiction, because even as I read these books I'm going to talk about below and drew my own conclusions, it was Miss Reed's thesis that I was holding in my mind the entire time, and so she deserves most of the credit. Anyway, let's reduce this Demon Lover story to its basic structure. A woman is going about the normal business of living her life when a man with ill intent intrudes upon her and either tempts or abducts her into utter ruin from which she will never recover. If you think for just a minute, I'm sure you can come up with at least a story that fits that description. And let's look at some here, the first 4 having been noted by Toni Reed herself. Tess of the D'Urbervilles. A story of a woman whose father sends her on a social climbing mission, which leads her to the horrible villain Alec d'Urberville. He rapes her, and it ruins her reputation and her life for years until she's ultimately rejected by almost everyone she's ever loved. Having nowhere else to turn, she returns to Alec and his abuse, until she becomes fed up, murders him, and is executed for it. Wuthering Heights, the story of a woman whose life becomes entangled with her jealous, vengeful, and cruel-natured adopted brother Heathcliff's. She marries another man, but is deliberately haunted by Heathcliff through his petty acts of vengeance until she's driven mad and dies in childbirth. Meanwhile, Heathcliff marries another woman, impregnates her, and tortures her until she runs away. Through deceit, he ends up with custody of both children and marries them to each other. His own son dies. He claims all the property, leaving the young girl indebted to him. Then he, with no one else to take revenge on, gives into madness and himself dies. Dracula, the story of a man who by his very nature as a mythical creature seduces women into letting him into their homes and lives and beds and physically destroys them by sucking the actual life from their bodies and leaving them emotional and physical husks. Think about the story of Persephone and Hades. Hades, with the consent of her father, abducts and rapes the young Persephone, dragging her literally to hell. When her mother finds out, she wreaks havoc and demands the return of her daughter. Before Persephone leaves, though, Hades tricks her into eating a fruit that ties her to the underworld, so even though she can visit the surface, she can never truly leave. She returns for 6 months every year where the land is fertile and bright and warm, but is forever condemned to spend the other 6 months underground where she's miserable and angry as the queen of the underworld, and all vegetation on the earth dies and is covered in cold and frost. This is how we have the 4 seasons, if you didn't know the myth. And speaking of forbidden fruits, shall we mention the book of Genesis? Where poor Eve is seduced by the literal devil and deceived into eating the forbidden fruit of the Garden of Eden, sharing it with her husband. For this, she and all of humanity become cursed by God to leave the garden, experience struggle, misery, and death, and, not to put too fine a point on it, God says to her, "I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." Jesus Christ. Bluebeard is about a woman who is forced to marry an ugly but wealthy nobleman. She disobeys his order to stay out of a forbidden room and discovers he has serially murdered all of his past wives, which causes him to attempt to kill her, too. The Greg Berlanti, Sarah Gamble show You, based on a novel by Carolyn Kepnes, is about a man obsessed with love so much that he stalks women, invading every part of their lives until they love him. Then he uses manipulation, deceit, and ultimately violence to try and make them conform to what he believes the perfect partner to be. His obsession and his pathology ultimately lead to the ruin and death of his victims. In researching the show, I found 7 distinct stories all called The Daemon Lover, 2 of which I described above. Another one is by Cecilia Holland, about a woman being seduced by an old wizard who promises her beauty and comfort. Only she discovers he's an evil conjurer of illusions and wants to rape and trap her for all eternity. One by Sarah Monette is about a man, actually, who takes a male lover that turns out to be a succubus. The man drains him of his life and will to live, and the only way he can be overcome is to painfully and desperately ignore him. There's an old-timey radio serial where a woman becomes possessed by an Egyptian god of love and stalks a college professor. She pursues him rapidly until he kills her in self-defense, is accused of murdering her in cold blood, stripped of his job, and locked in a psychiatric ward.
Our mystery drama, Daemon Lover, was written especially for the Mystery Theater by Sam Dan.
I love you.
You must be making a mistake.
Darling, darling, darling.
What is the meaning of this, please? Who are you?
I must have you. Say you love me.
I really can't do that.
Then die.
No, you don't. Now, you let go of that thing, you idiot.
I must kill you.
Let go. It's hard to believe, Florence, but it's the truth.
And so you insist that this charm of the goddess is what made Maria Chipuchin throw herself at you?
Yes, it has to be the answer.
Why?
What other answer is possible?
If it's true, then why? Why don't I?
Florence?
Why?
Florence, is something wrong?
Oh, Albert. Oh, my darling. No other woman can have you. I'll kill you first.
You're crazy.
If I can't have you, she won't have you either.
I don't have to listen to this.
I will strangle you with my own bare hands. Isis, give me strength.
Don't try.
Isis, help me to fulfill thy command.
You're choking me. Let go. Hey, what makes you do it, Doc? I mean, one time I dig, but, gee, 2 in a row. I don't know. I just don't know. She was okay. I mean, for a dame.
I call that one the double Daemon Lover. Is this getting exhausting? There are so many of these stories. And if you guys want to send your own in, I'm sure you can find other examples. My email's at the end of this program. And the question is, why is this motif so common? Let me quote several Tony Reed passages that I think sort of pave the way to explaining this. Or, yet, I know this episode is very bookish and dry, so what I'll do is I'll have some friends read them to break up the tone. Then you can, take a break from my voice for a minute.
One possible explanation for the faithful perpetuation of the Daemon Lover motif is that historically, men have had power over women and have protected that power by willfully subjugating women, and more, by possessing them. Perhaps the Daemon Lover conflict expresses the collective oppression of women and, as a body of literature, represents a collective warning to women to not deviate from male-defined roles, for those who do are punished. Archetypes duplicate identifiable features of society. Archetypes and fictional characters, then, are not created in a vacuum, but instead mirror reality. If archetypes found in works of literature reflect actual roles played in society, then the Daemon Lover conflict may indeed reveal the quintessential struggle between the sexes identifiable in our patriarchal culture.
As listeners, we respond to stories told in ballads because we intuitively wish to complete ourselves through a process that Jung calls individuation. In other words, we have a drive to confront our shadows in the art with which we identify, and in the same way, artists project their shadows when they create art.
We respond to these stories out of our own fears and anxieties, and we are drawn to them because of our urge to reconcile our destructive shadow selves with another side of ourselves, the vulnerable victim. Daemon Lover stories provide safe, objective ways to examine the dynamics of our own interior worlds. The Daemon Lover and the literature patterned after the ballad reflect the same basic conflict, a conflict between aggression and victimization, between power and powerlessness.
My interpretation is that the popularity of this motif is brought about by two things. fear, and introspection. It's used as a warning by women of ways that society, and especially evil men, can destroy them for straying from social norms. It's used by men to warn women not to step out from under their control. It's used by women to process their fears about the world they live in and the people they are. The feeling that maybe some decisions and pursuits of their own are not truly theirs, but planted by fear of being victimized. It's used by men to struggle with their own ugliness and, confront, mock, yell at, or warn of the demons that they have inside themselves. And I'm using men and women here as illustrations of their roles throughout history. I think the fears here can be gender agnostic in individual situations. But as it relates to societal trends and this archetype, I think it's valuable to look at these as a sign of patriarchy. That's why I'm using a male-female binary here, one that I don't, always believe in, but clearly has social power. This story motif, this archetype, it's a powerful example for the difference in men and women's experience with former lovers. Men often feel their exes should be punished for hurting them. Women often fear that their exes will reappear suddenly or become violent and seek retribution. In this ballad, in Demon Lover stories, both often become true. Men are afraid that women will laugh at them. Women are afraid that men will kill them.
Well met, my own true love. Well met, cried she. I've just returned from the salt, salt sea, and it's all for the love of thee. I could have married a king's daughter there. She would have married me. But I have forsaken my king's daughter there, and it's all for the love of thee. If you could have married a king's daughter there, I'm sure you're the one to blame. For I am married to a house carpenter, and I'm sure he's a fine young man.
We've tracked so many ballads in this podcast that had a long legacy in music and poetry. It's interesting that this one has a long legacy in literature. The Demon Lover has inspired so many stories that I bet it'd be impossible to track them all. Again, feel free to email me if you have an example I missed here. But it's because those stories have inspired stories, and those stories have inspired stories. And I'm not comfortable in saying that the Demon Lover was the common ancestor, because we know that the motif existed before, see, Persephone and Eve. But it's safe to say that it's a pretty large marker on the journey. By the way, I mentioned that I found 7 stories called The Demon Lover, and I only described 5 of them. One is just like a dystopian movie about the pornography industry that kind of doesn't relate. And the last one is, well, this.
New York City. It's a jungle.
I'm affectionate.
Bonsoir and good evening, ladies. And all Denny wanted was someone to love.
The strays, they see you coming miles away. Dogs, alley cats, actors.
I am called Cat.
I like men.
Hey, then, she met her perfect mate.
You are attracted to scum. All I want is someone to take care of me.
I am a Pazatsky.
Oh.
You got the curse all over you, boy. It's sex. I can't do it, think about it, or even look at it. I turned into a monster.
Piece of cake. Honey, it won't change the way I feel about you.
No. You would have bet.
Oh. You either gotta get tough or you gotta get a gun.
Put your mouth where your mouth is. Kiss me, stir me up, prove to me that I'm wrong.
You look really, really awful.
But what brings out the best in her brings out the beast in him. Falling in love can be very scary. My Demon Lover, starring Scott Valentine.
A sexy madcap comedy about a man in New York City who is cursed by a witch to become a literal demon when he becomes sexually aroused. And the quirky woman who falls in love with him. It ends with a fight on a castle that for some reason is in the middle of New York City, like just like a gothic Transylvanian castle. I watched the whole movie and it's bad. There's not like one good moment in it. And sorry. And here's another song called Daemon Lover by Shocking Blue, a band named after a crayon that has nothing to do with the ballad, but if you tilt your head and squint, you can see how it fits into this motif.
It hurts me so to be under your spell. Ain't no heaven for me, but a hell. But after all, I can't let you go, 'cause I love you so. Demon lover, demon lover, demon lover, I love you.
I know every episode of this podcast has a different flavor. And this one is the taste of old books. I've been very wordy and expository, and for that I apologize, but there's just so much going on here. I spent so much time on literary analysis, I didn't get to share with you some of the weird or awful, shocking things about this ballad I dug up, like this list of places the lover says he'll take the woman.
And I'll take you to where the grass grows green on the banks of Bittereen.
Banks of Italy.
On the banks of the St. Willie,
Down by the sweet Dundee.
Thanks of the sweet lady, my love. Thanks of the sweet lady.
Banks of a deep blue sea. Banks of Italy. The banks of the sweet Willie.
on the banks of the sweet Willie, on the banks of the river Dee.
I'll take you where the grass grows green on the banks of the deep blue sea.
And how no one's really sure what most of those are. Or the terrible moment I was listening to the Almeida Riddle version of the song, and this horribly racist word came up, and I won't even play it. You can seek it out for yourself. Or that based on some clues in the song and the likely time period, Gerard Carruthers speculates that when the lover went off to sea, it was possibly as a member of Robert the Bruce's invasion of Ireland.
I never would have trodden on Irish ground, but for the lovely.
But alas, I spent too much time on the ethical, social, and literary aspects of the song. Today's just not the day for fun. It's okay, we need that sometimes. And it's not just me, there are literally dozens, if not hundreds, of essays out there on this ballad. I myself read almost a dozen in writing this episode. I'll include as many as I can on the website for you all to browse if you're feeling froggy and still looking to jump. But here's what I'm taking away here, and it's something I've tried to do a lot in recent years. I'm taking this information, and as a cisgendered man, I'm using it to re-examine my own relationships to and with women. It's so deeply entrenched in our culture to feel possessive of women, and not in this overarching, you have to do what I say way, but in these very, kind of subtle ways. We as men often, again, in ways we can't always identify, feel threatened by the agency of women. We've been conditioned to ignore the fears that people express about men. We've been empowered in our fiction and in our music to scrutinize the intents and actions of women and the decisions they make, and react with horror and anger to things like infidelity and perceptions of greed or ungratefulness. Not that those are great traits in anybody, but the cultural tradition has been slanted real hard against women when those things come up. If you look at, for example, in infidelity, men are often called like playboys or gadabouts or men about town, while women are called sluts and whores. And I'm not trying to lecture. I'm just telling you what I've been examining in myself, and I found here that there are a lot of actions in my past that were informed by things like jealousy and making a woman responsible for the fragility of my own ego. And I know I've benefited passively and actively from women's fears of my or society's reactions to their wants and needs. Women not wanting to express exactly what they want or exactly what they need because they're afraid that, I might call them selfish or that society might view them as a nag. Once again, not to say that selfishness or nagging are things that are positive, just there's things that are ingrained in society to be critical of women about more than they're ingrained in society to be critical of men about. And as I go forward in life, and I know this stuff can never go away instantly, but I want to try and keep those things in mind and work to overcome those patterns I see in myself. Again, just a little thought to close it out. This topic is so deep and complex, I think anyway, and I could go on forever about it. So if you guys want to discuss it in more depth, feel free to reach out. I would love to keep having this conversation because, this one has really sparked my introspection and curiosity. Fables and folklore are tales that are told over and over again in many forms, Sometimes to instruct or to warn or entertain. Sometimes just because they speak to something deep within the human psyche that needs to be expressed. Folk songs are part of this tradition. Not only do you get the same stories or melodies replayed over and over again, they mutate, they change, they evolve, they become corrupted. You also get themes and ideas that repeat over and over again. The hero's journey, the deceiver falling into their own trap, the persecuted heroine, the demon lover. All right, I think we're there.
Well met, my own true love. Well met, cried he. I've just returned from the salt, salt sea, all for the love of thee. Well, I could have married the king's daughter, she would have married me, but I've forsaken her crowns of gold, all for the love of thee. Well, if you could have married the king's daughter, I'm sure you are to blame, for I am married to a house carpenter, and I find him a nice young man. Ah, will you forsake your house carpenter and go along with me? I'll take you to where the grass grows green by the banks of the salt, salt sea. Well, if I should forsake my house carpenter and go along with thee, what have you got to maintain me on and keep me from poverty? 6 ships all out on the sea, 7 more upon dry land, 110 all brave sailor men will be at your command. Well, she picked up her only babe, and kisses gave him 3. Said, stay right here with my house carpenter and keep him good company. Then she put on her rich attire, so glorious to behold, and as she trod along her way, she shone like the glittering gold.
thanks as always to Steve Roud and the Vaughan Williams Memorial Library, all for the existence of the Roud Folk Music Index. And in this episode, in particular, to Tony Reed, wherever you are, for her incredible book, which inspired so much of this discussion. And thanks to the following people for their contributions to this episode: Charlotte Levy and her cousin Albert, Ashley Stoneman, Brooke Gray, Berta Fogarty, Mike Callahan, Rachel Sinnott, Cameron Fogarty, David Reinstein, Anne Christine Pfeiffer, Pat Reber, Tiffany Harkleroad, Bailey Kung, Rachel Semigran, and Christy Jordan.
Well met, my own true love. Well met, cried he.
And thanks to the following artists whose music is played throughout the episode: Mark Phillips, Pauline Scanlon, Baroshal Machine, The Handsome Family, Alasdair Roberts, Corn Dog. No, it's not it. Cornog. That's barely better. Rosaline Gregory, The Iron Horse, Harvesters, Bob Dylan, Natalie Merchant, Dave Von Ronk, David Grisman and Daniel Kobiaka, Janet Smith and Steve Mann, Dervish, Nickel Creek, Sub Rosa, Hetty West, Carolina Tar Heels, Custer LaRue, Fawn Fables, A.L. Lloyd, Shocking Blue, The X, Diane Taraz, Carl Peterson. If you've liked any of the music you've heard, please go seek it out and download it and pay for it and be one with it. I have it all listed at everyfolksong.xyz, as well as the music from every other episode of this show and links to where you can purchase it all. You can find me on social media using my full name, Matt Aucamp, A-U-K-A-M-P, or email me at mattaucamp@gmail.com. I truly and honestly love to hear from you, and in addition to hearing from you all, I love to get reviews because it brings other people to the show. If you haven't, it'd be a kindness to me to go do that. And if you're feeling like doing me an even bigger kindness, I do have a donate button on the website. Speaking of which, a huge thank you to Robert and Charles.
Sono tornato dal mare salato solo per amare te. Potevo avere la figlia del re.
I believe the next episode y'all will hear is kind of a special one. It's a bug I got in my brain that I spent a year trying to get out, and it's definitely different than any other episode I've done. Look forward to that within the next month or two, I think. However, the next regular-ass episode will come out at some point, and it will center on Roud 15, the Cruel Ship's Carpenter, or, as it's more commonly known, Pretty Polly. It's a murder one. A pretty dark and depressing murder one. So, until then, take care, folks.
Ti scorderai del bel falegname e verrai via con me. Ti porterò dove l'erba è verde alla riva del mare salato, alla riva del mare salato. Potessi scordare il buon falegname, io verrò